Hi guys and welcome back. So yesterday we did create this UI design for to-do list, but we did not add any functionality, but we finished up on the UI bit whereby now we have an input, we have a button to add a new to-do, we have the to-dos and we have the visualization of a finished to-do. This one is a finished to-do. But this is the illustration whereby if it's finished, then it should have a tick. It is not finished, it should not have, but this is just a design. So the finished version is here. So let me show you. This one also persists in what we call a local storage. Local storage is a browser's, like each browser gets some space where it can store its stuff. So one of the spaces is called local storage. So that's what we are going to use. And this one persists data of our website in the website's memory. So for instance, if you log into a popular, maybe if you have an authentication website or a dashboard, how does this dashboard, when you even close the browser and come back, know that it is you? Because there is some data that these websites store in the browser's memory or in a safe space that is just for that website. One of it is called local storage. We also have others like cookies, IndexedDB, but in our case, we're just going to focus on local storage and see how we can store these to-dos inside local storage such that even if I refresh the screen, then the to-dos will still persist. So let me add a new to-do. So a new to-do will be take a shower. We add that to-do. You can see it has been showed here. Let's add a new to-do and call it take my dog to a walk. We add that new to-do. It is added. Then the functionality we are adding is that now we can finish up this take shower. And then you can see it is crossed. And then you can see now we add a tick. We add a tick. And also we can finish the dog's walk. And then we can also toggle back and say, hey, we did not finish. We did this by a mistake. This is a functionality we are going to add. And if I refresh the screen, nothing happens because these to-dos are stored in the local storage. So let me show you where the local storage lives. So when you open your browser, inspect, and then look for application, look for the application, click on the application, you'll see storages. So these are all the storages that the browser provides to websites. One of it is the local storage. We have session storage, all the others, IndexedDB, cookies, all these storages, but we are just focusing on the local storage. And inside the local storage, you can see we have a key called to-dos, and inside we have to-dos. So inside the to-dos, you can see these are the individual to-dos we have. We have an ID, is it completed, value, and all these things. So even if I refresh the screen, even if I do what, these to-dos still retain what we had. All right. So let me inspect again. Let's go to application. Right now we don't have any. So let's go back and create call my grandpa. We add that new to do and then walk my dog. And then if you refresh, this one doesn't go away. And then we can toggle that down or how we want it. So this is where we reached at. You can see I've moved to a new tab. This is where we reached at. We don't have the ability to add. We don't have the ability to toggle off. This is what we are going to add in this session. So how are we going to start? Let me put this here and this and there. So if you want to follow along with the finished version, you can go to my GitHub. My GitHub username is TechWithTwin. The project you're looking for is the TikTok-projects. And then look for a folder named as to-do-1. This one now contains the finished version of the whole code. So let's remove that and then let's continue. So what we are going to do, we are going to create a script file now. So we can say script.js and then let's link the script to the HTML by coming here before the closing body tag. And we say that the reason we add it before the closing body tag is because we want everything to render, then our JavaScript to render afterwards, such that if you try to load the JavaScript on top, it might try to access an element that has not yet been created. So we are avoiding that situation. So we can say script, then source script.js. And then to know whether the script is working, we just go here and alert and say working. So this is the finished version. Let me create a new github.com/TechWithTwin. I want to separate these tabs. So the left one, this is what we are working with. And then we said we alert working. And then you can see the alert is working. That means our JavaScript is working. So let me zoom in. So where do we start? So that's a big question. So we have the to-do wrapper. Let me explain this code because someone might just, if you have not watched the design version, you could go and watch that and then come back later and finish. So we have a to-do wrapper. This is the wrapper, the whole card. And then we have the header. The header contains the title and the number of tasks. This is what corresponds here, the title and the number of tasks. You can close that. We have another section. This section is adding a new to-do. As you can see, it has an input and a button to add that new to-do. We can close that. We have now a to-do list section. The to-do list section contains to-dos. So this is a to-do, 1, 2, but they are wrapped inside a to-do list, and this whole thing is the to-do list. All right. And then inside we have to-dos. So we have to-do 1, and then we have to-do 2. I can remove this and save. You can see we are left with 1. So that's basically what we have. And then we don't care about the CSS right now. We can just continue and not focus on the CSS. So let's go to our script and let's start creating this. So the first thing you might ask yourself is that, where do we start? Where do we start? And what are the functionalities we are looking forward to doing? So we want, whenever someone types a new to do, then they click the add new to do button, we can add that to do. And then we want the ability to list these to-dos. We said we're just going to focus on how we can use the local storage. So the local storage is very simple. It is just that JavaScript, there are some set of methods that we can use to access the local storage and then store stuff from there. So the first thing I am thinking of is, let me first grab the input so that I can grab the data as soon as someone adds a new to-do. So what we can do now, let's grab the input. We can say cos input is equals to document dot query selector, and then we only have one input, so we don't even need to add an ID to it. We can just grab it by its tag name. The next thing we need is the button, so we can say const button is equals to document dot query selector, and then we can just get it by the tag button because we only have one button in the whole page. But in case you are working with a very huge script or a very huge project, then you need to go down and now add buttons to this. You could add an ID that says add new to do as an ID. Then you can grab it by that ID. But as I said, in my case, I only have one button. I only have one input, so I don't even need to specify more. The next thing I want to do is, now this person is adding a new to do. So what do we want to do? We want to listen whenever someone clicks on add new to do button so that we can get access to the data in the input. So we say button.add event listener, and the syntax for the event listener, I've already talked about this, is that the first argument is always, what do you want to listen on? You can listen on a click, you can listen on double clicks, you can listen on all kind of stuff. You can see close, change, all this, but we care about whenever someone clicks on a button. And then we need to provide a function that handles that event. So it's called an event. So we are adding an event list, and you need to specify who handles this. All right. So how the events work is very simple. The first one, you specify the event you want. The next argument, you provide a function. This function, you can write this function inline, or you can pull this function outside. So the best way, if you are learning, you can write this function inline like this. That's a function. This is an inline function. But if you are not confident about writing inline functions and they are giving you a headache, you can now create another function here and say function handle add new to do. You see how I'm naming it so that I cannot forget. Then you can, now the second argument, now you pass the function reference. You don't call the function, because even if I was to pass the function inline, I'm not calling this function. This function is not yet called. This function is exactly equals to this function. This function is not yet called. So we are not calling that function. We are passing a reference to it so that whenever JavaScript captures this click event, it calls that function. Inside this function, we have access to stuff, but we have access to an argument called event. This event will tell us all the details about the event that was captured, but this is optional. We don't even care about it unless you want to use it. All right. Now, what I want to do now is we have the input. This input corresponds to this input in the DOM. It corresponds to this input. So we can get the value from the input directory by saying let input value is equals to input dot value, just like that. And then what I can do now to just show you is that I can alert input value. I can alert the input value. So let me just show you. Right now, if I alert, you see nothing because the input is empty. So I can say my new to do. So we are alerting my new to do because this is the input's value at the moment you click the button. So the first thing we want, the first logical thing, we don't want to add empty inputs to our local storage. We want to write an if statement that says if the input value is false, so by saying, so let's first ignore the not. So if input value, what does this mean? You're trying to evaluate the input value to a Boolean. So if the input value is empty, an empty string is false. So how can we make sure that our loop condition gets into this block? So it's like saying if false, this one won't continue to the block. So, but if we say if not false, then we can get inside here and alert invalid input. And then make sure you return to prevent the function to continue executing. So what we want is we want to capture if there is no input value. This is how you read this. If there is no input value, this one is why we have a not, alert that. So let's try this invalid input. So we don't even continue executing the rest of the code because we did something called an array return. But you can ignore that. Then let's continue. So we have the input value. Now at this juncture, we already know what this user wants to add. For instance, if I'm adding call mom, at this point, we have access to this, whatever this user added, call mom. We have it. So we just need to add it to the local storage and then we display it here. All right. So what we are going to do now is that we want to add a new to do to the local storage. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create another function, a reusable function that will be used to get to do's from the storage. The function I'm going to call it function get to do's from storage. So I'm creating a reusable function that will help me get to do's without me having to do a lot of work or without me having to remember how to do's are gotten from the local storage. So how do you get data from the local storage? So let's go here. Let me show you how the local storage works. The local storage has its own ways of working. So let me make this big. So we have the local storage object. So we can call the local storage and say, you can see now the storage is empty. We have methods. I'm going to teach you two methods, get and set. So we can say dot set item. We can set an item and the first argument is the key. The key is like the property name. So we want to say this is the key that you'll use to get your data back. And then to do, then you can say first to do. So let me do this first to do. We can store any type of data. So we did store. Now if we call the local storage Let's do local storage. You can see the local storage here, the highlighting. It has something. It has a to-dos with the value of first to do. So we can get an item, and then we use the key we used to-dos, and then we can get the data from it. That means we don't necessarily have to store a string. We can store a full object inside here. We can store an object. Let me show you. Let's create a new one. So we can say local storage dot set item. Let's do person. Now we are creating just something, and then the data will be let's create a person. We can say name equals John. But now we don't want to store objects. We cannot store objects to local storage. You can only store strings. How do we convert an object to a string? Using JSON, the JSON format. So we can say JSON.stringify, and then we stringify that object. So I know it is allowed to take in. So just like that, let's see. And then local storage dot get item. We can get an item from local storage dot get item, and then we can get the person. This one is a JSON string. So something to note, I know this might be a lot to take in. So we have objects in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, let's say we can create an object, and an object is a group of related data. For instance, I could create an object and say const person is equals to we have now inside the object we can have properties values. So we can say name equals to John, age equals to 20. This is a person object. This is an object. It is just used to store data. And then with an object, you can get data from an object. So if you wanted to get this person's name, you could just say person and then get the name. You can do that, or you can do person.name. There are ways to work with objects. But now this is not our what we care about. What we care about is that we want to store this object to local storage, but we can't store an object. We need to store a string. So we need to convert the object into a string format by using the JSON format. And then you use the stringify that object. Then this is the string representation of that object. And then after stringifying it, you can convert it back to an object and continue working with it. So just that was just a brief introduction to local storage. But now let's continue with our task at hand. We want to get the to-dos from the local storage. What I need now is I want to create a key that I'm going to use. So I'm going to say const to-dos key is equals to, I'm going to use this key to store my to-dos so that I don't forget, so that I don't access to-dos via a different key. And then here, we want to get the existing to-do from the storage. So we can say let to-dos string is equals to, call the local storage. I showed you how the local storage works. We can get an item. So we try to get the item via this to-dos key. To recap, we want to get the to-do string. This is the data of to-dos. These are all the to-dos, but now we are not going to store it as an array. We are going to store it as, we are not going to store as an object. We are going to use an array in JavaScript, whereby we can now store a to-do by maybe ID is this one. And then the value is now the actual to-do. Go call mom. And then is completed. You also need to know whether it's completed, and then we can say false. This is the kind of data. These ones will be many. So you can have 1, 2. So this is the kind of data we are storing inside the local storage key name called to-dos. So what will happen is that in the local storage, you'll have a key called to-dos, and the data will be this shape, which represents our to-dos. All right. Let me keep that there. I think it will also be nice. But now this one will be a string because we are going to convert these to, let me call this one const sample. And we are going to convert this one into a string by saying json.stringify. We are stringifying this to a string, and then we are stringifying the sample. So this one will be a string representation of this one, but we can also convert back that string into JSON, into this format. I know that might be a lot to take in, but just bear with me. Let's finish. So first of all, now, if we don't have any to-dos, the local storage, when you try to get an item with a key that doesn't exist, this is what you get. You get a string representation or a string or null. So if what you are trying to get doesn't exist, you'll get null. That's why I'm going to write a check here and say if not to-dos string, then we return null. So this one might be the to-dos is empty, or there is nothing, there's no value, we have the key, there is no value, or it doesn't exist. We are just going to return null from this function. Otherwise, if the string is found, we now need to pass the data back into an array that can be used. So what we do now, we create a variable and call it passed data. And the reason we are creating this value is that now we need to use a try catch. Let me show you why. And then reset the pass data to json.nowPass the to-dos string. Otherwise, we alert and say failed to pass JSON string, and then console.error, then error. So why did we do this? Why did we have to go through all these issues? So the reason we are using a try catch is because this pass, whenever this pass fails to pass a string, it throws an error. By throwing an error, if you don't catch that error will crash the program. So that's why we use a try catch, so that whenever this throws an error, the error is handled here. And then we can show the user some errors. And then if the data is passed successfully, we can return the passed data. Remember, the passed data is in this format. So we can also loop through this data, show it here. All right, so let's go back. Yes, we can now collapse this and go back to the handle add new to do. And then so we can get the existing to-dos. These are past data. So we can say let existing to-dos is equals to get to-dos from storage. And we remember this one can return this sample data, or let me make this big. So it can return the sample data, or it can return null. Why do I know that? Because we explicitly returned null, or we returned the past data. So what we are now going to do, we have the existing data. It can be null or it can have data. So first, let's create the new to do. So you are going to say new to do. Let me just not waste space. So let new to do is equals to, remember we have the inputs value. For instance, if I have this df and new to do, we have this value. So we can add a new to do and say the ID, we can use the current date's timestamp. We don't care about that too much. And then the value, it's the input value, and then is completed is false. So whenever you add a new to do, it can't be completed. We are just going to default it to not completed. Then we have to check and see whether we have these existing to-dos. So if we have existing to-dos, we just need to append the new to-do to the existing to-dos. So we can say if existing to-dos, if they are existing to-dos, then let's create a variable now and call it new data. Let new data. So this one is the new data. So we want to check if there is existing to-dos. We can say now the new data will include now the existing to-dos. If it exists, it is an array. All right. So we can create a new array, and then we spread the existing to-dos, and then we add the new to-do at the end. I know the spread operator might be new to you, but whatever it does is that if we spread this sample, it takes in this data and paste it here. Something else to remember about spreading. If you spread and data, if you spread, let me show you. I don't want to just, so let me just show you about the spread. It's better we use a lot of time, but we can now learn. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create, let me create const let people. You're going to create an array of people, and then the array will have objects inside, and the objects will represent a person. So we can say name, John, and then the age will be 20. And then we can close that. Then let's add the second person and say name is TechWithTwin. And then the age is 30. And then we can close that up. And then we can close our array. So people. So let's do pair people. So people is an array of two things, and the two things are objects. So the first object is a person with the name of John and the age of 20. The second person is the name of TechWithTwin and the age of 30. Let me show you the spread operator. So how does the spread operator? Let me do the people again. Let me show you what the spread operators does. So this is what the spread operator does. What if I want to create a new person and add them to the people? So what I can do is people is equals to, we open a new array and then we spread the existing people. All right. And then we can add a new person here and say name, Brian, age 67. Now people has the new data. You can see now it has Brian. This is how the spread operator works. I think I will talk about spread operator in another tutorial, but for now, just bear with me. And that's all. Let me show you something about spreading an object. Let's create an object and say let root is equals to, let's use car. Let's car is equals to, let's create an object and the name is Mustang. Age is 30 years. So this is a car. Let me show you how about spreading an object. If you spread an object, let me show you. What if you want to change the car's age? We can say car is equals to, we copy everything from the existing car, and then we can change the age to 45. So this one will come in handy. Now the car has the age of 45. This one will come in handy when we are trying to talk what to do is complete or not complete. I can see time is gone. So let's finish up. And then, so this is the spread operator. The new data will have the appended to do, and then else new data. Let's give the new data is equals to the new to do. So you can do that, or you say so it is equals to new to do. That means you're just creating a new array, and in the first it will just have one thing, which is the new to do. We can close that. After adding the new to do, now we can call the local storage and set the item. So we can say local storage dot set item, and the item we are storing is the to do key, and the data is, we stringify the new data dot stringify, and then we stringify the new data. Up to that point, I hope no one is lost. If you are lost, I showed you where the finished version of the code is. You can go ahead and go through it and see whether you'll understand. Something else I want now, after adding the new data to the to-do, we need to refresh the UI. How do we refresh the UI? By reshowing the new task, by recalculating the new tasks, and by rerunning these to-dos. So how we can do this is that let's create a function called init. I'm going to call that function okay. So I'm going to call a function called init, and this function's job, let me close all these. Let me remove the sample. Okay, the init function's job, let me repeat, the init function's job is to initialize. So I'm going to create this function and call it init. This one, the init will be used. So whenever we run this script, this file for the first time, the init will be responsible for rendering the to-dos from local storage, as well as showing the data, showing the number of tasks. So we are going to create an init, and then let's call it. This one will be immediately evoked. We can call it. So what we are going to do now here is that let's create another function to count the to-dos. So we can call a function called count to-dos. What will be the work of this count to-dos? It will get the to-dos from the storage and then count them and update here. That means we need to go back to our HTML and give these a class. So we can give this one that shows the number of tasks. We can give it a class and say tasks count. We can come back. Let's create this function called count to dos. So we can create this function called count to dos, and we say that its work is just to count the to dos. So we're just going to say function count to dos. Let count is equals to 0. Initially the count will be 0. Let existing to dos is equals to get to dos from storage. So you can see why I created a reusable function. Now I can just call it. It can give me the to dos that are passed already. You can see we are passing the to dos here. So it will be something we can count and or null. So and then we can say now, if we have existing to dos, then we just update the count. Count is equals to existing to dos dot length, because now this one is a JavaScript array. We can just use the dot length, and then what do we do now after getting the count? Because this existing to do can give us the count. If there is an error, this one is not truthy, because you can see we have an if statement, then this one will be 0. And then let's update the tasks count paragraph. So we can do document dot query selector, and then we get the dot tasks count dot, and then we can update the text content is equals to, let's template this and say count and then tasks. There's an issue with passing the string, but we don't care right now. But let's continue and focus on the, so we have an ability to count the to-dos. Let's add the ability to render the to-do list. So this one is the to-do list. We need to render that from the local storage. We get that data and render it to the HTML. So we can say render to-do list. So let's create this function. We say this function's job also is very simple. Function render to-do list. It will still do the same thing we have done with the count, but now it will do the same thing. So this one will be let to-dos. Let's get the to-dos from the storage. So we are going to say let to-dos is equals to get to-dos from storage. We get the to-dos from storage. If there are no to-dos, we have nothing to render, so we can just return, right? And then otherwise, if there is, let's create a HTML string, which initially is an empty string. There's no issue. We'll focus on that later on. So what I'm thinking is now, why am I using a HTML string? Because I want to create the HTML. So inside the to-do list, I'm going to remove all these to-do. Let me cut this. So this one is the to-do. The to-do list will be empty, so I can cut that. And then since it will be empty, I think we can create a paragraph here and say P and say no to-dos. add new, and then let's give it a style. We can say color of red. So we don't use an equals, we use a. We'll fix that issue. So you can see now it is saying no to do's, add new to do, because our render to do is not currently rendering. So let's create a new HTML string. Why am I creating a HTML string? Because we want to recreate the HTML. I'll show you why. So we said the to-dos is an array. We can loop over this array and say to-dos dot for each to-do. For each to-do, we now append to the HTML string the new to-do. Not the new to-do, but the to-do HTML. Because we have so many to-dos as an array, we loop over those arrays, and then we create this string and add it to the HTML string, because this HTML string is what we will add back to the DOM. So we have the to-do, and then yesterday when we were creating about is it completed or not, we saw that if we add a completed class to the paragraph, it could handle the issue of is completed. So what I can do here is that I'm going to use a template string and say to do is completed. If to do is completed, then we add that class which is called completed. Otherwise, we add an empty string. Right? And then here on the wrapper div, this is where we are clicking. Let me show you in the finished version. This one is the wrapper div. This is where we are clicking to toggle the to do. So because we don't want to add event listeners directly, we don't want to grab all these wrappers and add event listeners to them. We can add an event listener inline, and the event listener we want, but I think let's first not focus on that. I think let's focus on the real deal. So also this image is this icon. So we can hide it. We can hide it if it's not completed. So we can say if to do dot is completed, then we can show it by saying display inline, otherwise none. I know this is much to take on, but we are just creating this. We are formulating the HTML. What I'm saying is that we get the to-dos from the local storage. The to-dos is an array. We loop over that array, and then we create the HTML from JavaScript. This is why we are creating the HTML from JavaScript. And then finally, we have the to-do list. I don't know whether we captured the to-do list on top. So let's capture it. So we can say const to-do list is equals to document dot query selector, and then we grab the dot to do list. So where is that to do list? This is the list of to dos. So we can go back to the script, and now we want now to formulate the to do list. You remember how we had the individual to dos here? Those are the individual to dos that are being created by this loop. And then we can just say to do list dot inner HTML. Now we are not changing the text content, we are adding HTML to it. So we can say dot inner HTML is equals to HTML string. Yeah, that's it. That's on how we can render the to-do list. That's just rendering. We get the to-dos from local storage. We create an empty string that will track the to-dos, and then using this, we can loop over the to-dos because the to-dos now is an array. I think I created a sample array here. ID is equals to that. The value is equals to call mom. And then is completed is equals to false. So this is the type of data we are getting from local storage after passing it from the string, all that. And then this is where we are looping over this data. So this one is like saying samples dot for each. And then for each sample, we create a to-do UI. That's what we are doing here. Just creating a to-do UI. And then in our init function, we count the to-dos and we render the to-do list. So the reason we are doing this is because this init will be used whenever we update the to-do. Maybe we say it's completed, we are going to recall this function which will re-render the count, show the new count, and then render the to-do list again. So it will re-render the to-do list, but now it will use the new data from local storage after we updated, maybe completing a specific to-do. Let's save that and start worrying about maybe the errors. So we are getting an error that failed to pass JSON. So before even we add the ability to toggle on and off, I think that we'll do in a new video. I can see time is much gone. So we have the init, we add an event listener to add a new to do. So the reason I think we are getting that is that we don't have that. All right, I can know where I think, so we add a new to do, all these. So let's go to the get to do's from storage. So the get to do's from storage basically gets the to do string using this key. So if there is nothing, it returns null, and then we create an passed data, and then we call the passed data and assign it. We pass the to do string. This one is the to do string. And then if there is an error, we alert failed to pass JSON string. And then we console log the error. So I can know where the issue is. So I think we can close the. I think we can close this, because now both of these are in the local storage. They are in the local host, so they are sharing the same local storage. So I'm going to inspect and clear everything out. Clear everything out. And then close that. And then let's go back and work on the new canvas. We save. We get failed to pass the to-do string. So let's see. And then let's inspect this and see whether we have any to-dos. Yeah, we do have the to-dos. So we remove all these we had created. And then let's refresh. Now after refreshing, we don't get an error. And then, so finally, I'm going to repeat this for the final time. We are getting the to-dos from storage. I showed you that in the local storage, we can only store strings. But in our sample data, we said we have ID of, and then the value is the core, and then is completed is equals to false. This is the kind of data we are getting from local storage. So we can either get it or not. So if this one will be converted to a string and stored to local storage, and then get to-dos from storage is getting the to-do string, this one as a string. And then if there are no to-dos or there's an issue, the get item, if it doesn't find that item by the key, it returns null. We just return. Otherwise, we get the pass data and then we try to pass the data. The reason we use the try catch, I said, is because the pass method of the JSON, it is passing the string it also converted. All right. So we pass this. This one is a string. JSON repasses it back to an object, and in our case is an array, and then we just return it. That is the job of the get to do's from storage method. Finally, finally, then after getting the to do's from storage, that's a reusable function. The other issue is to add a new to do. We said that adding a new to do, we get the existing to do. We have showed you how the get to do's from storage works. We get the existing to do's, and then we can, whenever we call this method, it can return something or not. So that's why we create a new data. We create a new to do because we have the value from the form. We can create the whole to do. We just need to add it to local storage. Then we check if we have an existing to do. If we do have existing to do's, we don't want to overwrite them. So we append the new to do on the existing to do, and we reassign the new data. Else, we just assign the new data to be just the new to do, because this might be the first time. And then finally, we set the data to local storage back. And then we call the init function. You say the init function will just count the to-dos and render the to-do list. And you can see it is called. So during the first render, this one will be called. But we are also calling it now during the other renders. So whereby it can count and render the to-do list again, whereby getting the new to-dos from the local storage. And we said the count is very simple. We initiate a count variable of 0. We said if we get the to-dos from the local storage, there might be to-dos or there might be not be. So that's why we start at 0. If there is existing to-do, we reassign the value back to the existing to-dos length. And then we update the DOM. The render to-do list does the same job. So it gets the to-dos from the local storage. It either gets the to-dos or it gets null. But these to-do are already passed. There's an object, so we can create a string, HTML string. So that you can think of this, we are trying to create such string using JavaScript. But now we are creating them for the to-dos so that here we can have a lot of to-dos as we want. So it creates we use a loop, we loop over each to-do, and then we create its corresponding HTML markup. And then finally, we just add that to the DOM using the to-do list.inner HTML. And you can see we are adding HTML because we are creating a markup of HTML. So enough talking, let's now test out and see. So adding a new to-do called mom. That one is added. So the functionality to toggle whether to-do is complete or not, we are going to create using a new video, but you can try this on your end. So we can say it added visit my grandmother. So you can see here, we forgot to add the to-do's value. So we just add to-do.value. So you see it's called mom. Because now how did that get updated? Because this init was called during the first render, which in turn re-renders the to-do list. And something you will come to understand is that whenever you are learning React, so React is a framework. Let me show you. React.js. So this is the React framework. This is a framework called React. You'll come to understand that whatever you are doing here by hand is what React does, because you can see we are re-rendering the to-do list. What we are doing is that we are recreating the to-do list and appending the new data. This is how React works. So we'll talk about that later on, but for now, let's first focus on JavaScript. We count the to-dos. You can see it says 1. And if I add a new to-do, how does that work? So we can say walk my dog. We add that to do. So how does those processes work? You add a new to do. The to do is gotten from the storage. We set the new data from the local storage, but we still call the init function. The init function goes ahead and counts the to-dos and updates the to-dos count. And it goes ahead and re-renders the to-do list. This to-do list comes from the backend, from the local storage. It re-renders those to-do list. And by re-rendering, we said that, let's go to the render. We get the to-dos from the local storage. So now we'll get the updated data. And then we create we recreate this data and set it back to the DOM using the inner HTML. Right now, you might realize that this one is not working. Let's also do something else, is that whenever we add a new to-do, we want to clear the input. So we can just go to the handle add new to-do. As soon as we set that, before we call the init, we can say input.value is equals to an empty string. So let's add a new to-do, which is create JS tutorials. Add a new to-do, the to-do is added, and then the input is cleared. And also, so your task, if you want to follow along, go ahead and try to add this functionality whereby you can toggle what to do, whether it's marked complete or not. It's a very simple process. So do it and maybe share a link with us in the comments. So thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments, what do you think about that project? Thank you.